maybe let me introduce myself first. So my name is Fabio. I am the machine learning operations lead at Merantix Labs, which is a company based in Berlin in Germany. Before that, I worked as a senior machine learning engineer at Merantix, but I originally have a background in theoretical astrophysics, where I did my PhD on research of the Saturnian system, which is very different from machine learning, but also very cool. So a while back, we evaluated different orchestration frameworks and decided to build a reference implementation using Flyte. So this is why we're here. And while we have been building this reference implementation, we thought a lot about the user experience of packaging the workflow, registering it, and then running it. And the title of this talk is lowering the entry barrier. How can we run a workflow with 1 command instead of 5? So it's 5, not 4, as in the invite. So it's actually 5. So let's look at what these 5 commands are. This is copied from the documentation. So the first thing you need to do is you need to build a Docker image that will be used by the pods. So you can do that either using Docker build and Docker push. That would make it 6 commands, but there is a shell script that does that for you. So it builds and it pushes. And after that, you have the image. You copy the image tag and paste it into the next command, which is pyflyte package. You say here what your module is, and you paste the image tag. And the output of this command is an archive that you then you kind of have this in your bash history. You don't need to paste it. The file name is kind of always a standard one, but then you use flight control to register this packaged workflow. And then if you want, you can either execute it using the UI, or you use flight control to get a launch plan. The output here is a YAML file. You can modify the values in that YAML file, and then you can use this YAML file to create an execution. So that makes it 5 commands. And I totally see why in projects that have, I don't know, like dozens or hundreds of tasks, I get why you need to do it that way, because you might want to only package a specific task, for example. But I think for a simple project that just has a bunch of tasks, like download data, pre-process data, test data, train model, deploy model, I feel that it would be nice if there was an easier way to do this. I reference here MLflow projects run. Like MLflow projects is a component of MLflow that orchestrates tasks, let's say, and lets you run them on Kubernetes. Like, it's way less powerful than Flyte, but I'm referencing it here because they have a similar problem that they need to build a Docker image containing the code to execute it remotely, and they do it under the hood for you by just building it for you when you call MLflow projects run. And because we have been using MLflow projects, I was thinking maybe pyflyte or flight control could build a Docker image for you in 1 command so that you don't have to do that. So we have thought of several iterations of how this could do. Let me show you the first one that I have abandoned. In the meanwhile, we thought, why don't we just call a workflow.py? Imagine this here is a workflow.py. It has a task or more tasks. It has a workflow. Why not have a click CLI here that you can pass a default image, you can pass it maybe a Spark image or some TensorFlow image, you can pass it a version, and then then you have a function that is called package and register, and if name is equal to main, then this is called. And then if you don't specify the default image, well, then there's some module that builds the image for you, given the Docker file and the Docker context. So either you pass it in, you would do that during CI, or when you don't pass it in, it would build it for you. And it would do the same for, let's say, a Spark image or some other images. And then this default image and the other images would be given to the Flyte remote, and the Flyte remote would then register, basically, in this case, the train task and the pipeline using that image and the version that is given either by the CLI, or the default could be to just get the current branch and the current commit from the Git repository, and maybe append a dirty if they're untracked files. So again, you can either pass the version indirectly, or it's obtained from the Git repository. And then we could create an execution using the remote. If, for example, if we say run, or we could say register to only register, like, can be optional. And we thought that we want the workflow during CI/CD and during local development to be very similar. So during development, the user would just say Python, my app workflows example.py without specifying anything. And that would tell the script, okay, I don't know what the image tag is, I need to build it. I don't know what the version is, so let's just get it from the environment. And in CI/CD, you typically don't have access to the Docker daemon, so you might want to build the images in the previous step of your CI/CD pipeline and then tell the script, look, I already have an image for the default image. I already have the tag, use this one here, don't build it. And the version could be like the tag on Git, for example. So use that, don't get it from the environment. Now, that was the first iteration. I have abandoned that since, because that would lead to a lot of code duplication, because that would mean that you have this logic in every workflow.py, right? So what we currently are thinking of, that's like another idea, I'm not saying it's the right one. We're looking of writing a Hydra launcher plugin for Flyte. Hydra is a configuration management tool by Facebook AI that we use to configure basically all of our machine learning systems. And you can write launchers that allow you to launch stuff on. They have one for Ray, they have one for some other systems. So there could be one for Flyte in principle, right? And the idea here would be to not specify in code how to build your Docker images, but have it in a structured config. Because Hydra is all about structured config. So there would be a workflow config. And in the workflow, we would know the project, we would know the domain, we would know the module name, and we would also know all images that are required. So there would always be a default image. We would know the path to the Docker file. We would know the path to the Docker context. We would know how to tag it. And then there could be a list of extra images. And the Hydra launcher could just say, okay, so the default image is not explicitly given as part of the CLI call. Let me build it because I have all the information I need to build it. And there's a Spark image, and okay, the Spark image is not given as a CLI argument, so I'm going to build it using this information. And the user would just call Python workflow.py, and then the Hydra launcher would use this information in the config file to know how to package the workflow and build the images, register it using the Flyte remote API. Now, during CI/CD, with Hydra, you can specify so-called overrides, and then the override would be like, don't build, use this image for the default image, use this image for the Spark image. And then the Hydra launcher would know, okay, like we don't want to build, we have. So that's another idea. I don't think that either of them is like what, then maybe that's a nice thing for us for experimentation. Maybe we do that later. But ultimately, I think the takeaway is that it would be nice to do it with a single command. And one way to do it could be to have in the Flyte config, we could have this information. What are the images? Like what's the default image? What extra images are required? What are their tags? What are the Docker files that are used to build them? What are the Docker contexts to build them? And then allow you to say, maybe PyFlyte register and run, package register and run, I'm not sure how it would call it. And it would then check, okay, does the user give me an explicit tag for the default image? If not, I will use the information I have in the config to build it. So in the config, it says there's a Spark image. Did the user give me one explicitly? No, the user didn't. So let's build it. And then all of that could happen automatically, which would be very similar to what MLflow is doing, because MLflow, when you say MLflow project run, it generates a Docker file for you and builds it. I wouldn't do that here. I would have the Docker file, for example, in the Flyte Python template, and then have in the Flyte config the information for how to build it. So that's maybe the takeaway. Is there a way to come up with a command in PyFlyte and config in Flyte config that would say, build the image this way, and then have one command that does all of it? So where can you learn more? Currently, this has been only in discussions between Ketan and me, and Kevin and, I forgot your name, but one other engineer from your side, I'm not good with names, have been involved. But if you're interested in this or have any feedback, ping me on Slack. I'm on the Flyte Slack. I'm interested in any feedback.
I would love to actually start a Slack channel on this to just I think what you propose is what we need to do. We need to get it down to one command. We actually had one command for some things in the past, but the way it was structured made it worse. But if you're using Hydra or something else, I completely think it should be one command from like start to end for experimentation, and still keep the flexibility of actually
Of course, yeah.
doing those things for like folks who have like 400 work. Like eventually people just start having like amassing workflows. Like that's what happens when they get like access to this.
And then you wouldn't want to do that probably because you want to package one task only.
Yeah.
But there should be an easier way for when you get started, you have like 2 tasks, right? And then.
Yep, absolutely. I think I agree. So are you okay with us slacking the channel? And we would love more feedback. You know, I don't think I don't know anything about Hydra. So please don't take my recommendations on this. Just that the only thing that I'll say is I would love us to have like one line to get started.
I'm not saying Hydra is the answer here. That's something we're trying now because we use Hydra anyways for configuration management, and there are launcher plugins for it. So we're trying whether that works, and we have a working prototype. It even allows us to do like things like with a Flyte kit plugin for the custom type transformer for Hydra configs. We can even now register the task and then pass in a Hydra config object, and it just gives it to the workflow, which is super nice. But I'm not saying that Hydra is the answer here. I think Flyte could also do that, and having the information of how to build the Docker images could be in Flyte config. So not saying Hydra is the answer. Yep. So I would want I think that the Slack channel should be about discussing of how the user experience could look like. Ultimately, I think that's something that's valuable also on Flyte, not only in Hydra.
Awesome. Yeah.
Does anyone have questions or feedback immediately?
That sounds to me like a great, cookie cutter like kind of example that we should add,
Yes.
Like, but yeah, let's totally discuss on this channel. Like, maybe using Hydra is the way to go. Like, I don't know. Let's talk.
Fabio, this is awesome. I love like where you're going with this. We've actually been like at Freenome, we've been thinking about this a little bit more to try and make it reduce the overhead of like launching Flyte workflows for our own users. And so our solution right now, is a little bit is not as neat. It basically involves like using make to like register and fast register, and it's like a single command right now because it just wraps like all these things in the background. I would love to like follow up on this with you on Slack. And we've been thinking about like ways where we can just use another tool that can take care of these kinds of things like automatically, that doesn't require us to write make files. 2 points of consideration here will be, can we using something like a lock file basically take away the need of determining if like if an image needs to be built or not, right? So like the only reason to not build an image is if everything else remains constant but only the code changes. And if we can, if Flyte can maintain some sort of a lock file to do that, like then we don't even have to specify default image, like let Flyte manage all of that, right? The second thing is that tags on this would be, in theory, like what you need, exactly like you said, is you just need the Docker, like the Docker build context, right? To like build a whole image. You could run, like Flyte could in theory have a component that runs in the control plane that just like receives, like a GCS path to like some Docker build context, and then actually build and register the workflows like internally, like when you run the command. And so you could run like build kit or something, like alongside like admin and propeller and stuff like that. So what that would mean in theory is that you just like run one command and like forget about it, right? And then Flyte will decide like, oh, do I need to build this image? Oh, it's already cached, only the code has changed. And then I'll just like use the existing image and do a fast register all in the back end, while the user doesn't have to worry about anything. So we've been kind of brainstorming about ideas to do this like outside of Flyte, but like it makes a lot of sense, I think, to do it internally in Flyte. And I would love to follow up on how we can make this nicer.
Yeah, that sounds super cool. Yeah, you could use Canonical for that, I guess, running in the cluster. It's kind of slow.
That's exactly right. Yeah, so there's a lot of options like Canonical, build kit, right? Like there's just like I think it's definitely possible because like all the toolkit already exists. It's just a matter of like wrapping it nicely. And I think if we all wanted to brainstorm, we could totally do it nicely.
Yeah, that sounds good. How do we organize that so that everybody finds the Slack channel?
Yeah, that'll be me. So I'll create a Slack channel. and only the organizer here. So I'll create a Slack channel. I'll invite a few folks and I'll put it in general, the name of the Slack channel. So just join in. We have to do something better about this discoverability, but at least for now, I think eventually you'll have to enter with a thing like SIGs, right? Like, we'll need like basically focus areas, focus groups focused on just the user experience of getting started like that. And we care deeply about this. So I think this can be the number one first thing that we work on. So look forward to a few folks getting added, and then in the general Slack channel.
Cool, that sounds good. I'm looking forward to the discussions.
Yeah, we are actually already building our Docker images in our backend. So yeah, it's kind of the same thought. We wrote a wrapper essentially, so you don't have to do it locally. So you upload your Docker file along with your workflows, and it will all be built in the backend basically. And I think this configuration, because yeah, this also we think about what if we have different tasks that need different Docker files, for instance, and so on. And I think having a nice configuration here that's integrated with Flyte would be really awesome. I'm definitely interested here as well.
You're building all of this and not contributing upstream. Sorry,
it's very crude, so it's just it's very crude. So I'd love to contribute to bring this to Flyte, but I think it needs it would need more work than how we do it right now.
Yeah, they are on GCP, so Jeev. But I think this is another thing, just from purely contributions point of view. What I've heard is that people feel that they things that they're working on is crude or not as, but usually it is better than what many others are thinking of. So it's absolutely okay, and we can create a new sandbox repo where you can experiment with these ideas and find like-minded folks, and that's why we are completely open source under the the Flyte.org umbrella. So it's to collaborate essentially with folks who are trying to solve cool problems. So please don't think that you're solving something that's crude, or it's usually better than many other people, and they'll eventually arrive at the same conclusions. So please collaborate. All right, Jeev is asking for what's your build environment. So are you using cloud build?
Oh,
so, are you asking me, or no? You're not asking me, right? You're asking Dylan.
Thorin, I think.
Sorry.
Asking Thorin.
We actually have two. Yeah, we don't use cloud build, even though we are on GCP, but we actually run. We have two ways we run. Either we run Docker and Docker, which is kind of but it works for everything in a cluster, but we also tried Canico, so we have both ways, but Canico sometimes is more fragile right now, so it fails for some things. So basically we still have Docker and Docker as a fallback. But I think the way to go is actually if you run in any cloud, I think all of them basically have a managed Docker build service, right? So I think that this is something we actually want to switch to.
Okay, awesome. So Jeev is offering to drive this conversation further. Awesome. But I also one point over here, and I think maybe Fabio would like to also, we'd love to listen to your thoughts also on this, that adding cloud build will probably slow down the iteration cycle. And I think one of the things I really wanted, that's why we have the fast register thing, like, essentially avoid the building of Docker containers. And the reason is the Docker container build is not slow. It's Docker container build and push, and that cycle becomes slow. But Fabio, what do you think?
So the way, maybe let me explain how MLflow does it. You don't specify what your Docker file is, and you don't specify the Docker context. They just assume that the directory where you say MLflow projects run, that's where your context is, and they generate a Docker file for you. And the only thing it does is it uses some base image that you specify, and then it does add ... Okay, and that is super fast. That takes like a second to build and to push, assuming that you don't have like a giant data set in your folder where you execute that. And here I wouldn't generate a Docker file on the fly. I would generate it using cookie cutter, for example. But as long as copy ... is the last line and you don't do the copy ... before you do some pip installs, it's actually very fast. I don't think that we will use the fast register method, even because this takes like a second to build with what I currently do. Like if my internet is bad, it takes like 5 seconds, but it's very fast. So the only thing you need to take care of is that your copy ... is kind of the last thing before you do any heavy installation stuff.
Yep, I agree. But like, what we have seen, the reason why the fast register exists is because some people don't have push permissions to registries. Even though I don't think that is like there should be sandbox registries that people can push to. It's okay. But yeah, organizations are interesting. So.
I'm not saying it's not a useful feature, but I think the way we will configure it, we won't need it. Yeah. I mean, ultimately about cloud build or Kaneko, etc. I think the default should be like local Docker daemon, but you can do it in a way that you specify some other command to do it. And yeah, I think if you configure the Docker file in a way that the copy ... is the final line, then running it locally will be way faster than using cloud build, because it has to retrieve the cache from the container registry, so that takes a while.
Yeah.
Let's keep discuss this on the Slack channel. Looking forward.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Fabio, for volunteering.